few weeks ago, we put out a video exposing the Egyptian military buildup in the Sinai Peninsula on Israel's border. This situation is only getting worse, and it has significant diplomatic and geopolitical considerations, an effect that we're going to talk about in a few minutes, so stick around for that part of the video. But take a look at this report from Tamir Morag, senior political correspondent for Channel 14 cable news in Israel.
כמעט 120 מיליון תושבים חיים במצרים, רבים מאוד מהם בתנאי עוני מחפירים. אבל לדבר אחד, נראה שבקהיר יש מספיק כסף. מתחת לאפה של ישראל, הצבא המצרי הלך והתעצם בשנים האחרונות, עד שהפך לאחד הצבאות החזקים ביותר באזור. אבל מה שמדאיג יותר, נראה שלמרות הסכם השלום בין המדינות, מכונת המלחמה המצרית נבנית לצורך מלחמה בעיקר מול מדינה אחת, ישראל. בתרגילים ובמשחקי המלחמה שעורך הצבא המצרי, האויב הוא תמיד ישראל, לא לוב הבלתי יציבה, או אתיופיה, שאיתה יש למצרים מחלוקת קשה על מי הנילוס. הצבא המצרי מתאמן, כך נראה, לשטוף את סיני, ומשם את הנגב ואת מדינת ישראל. על פי הסכמי השלום בין ישראל למצרים, חצי האי סיני אמור להיות אזור חיץ מפורז שימנע מתקפת פתע כזו, אבל בפועל זה כבר מזמן לא המצב. המצרים חרגו פעם אחר פעם מהיקף הכוחות שמותר להם להחזיק בסיני, ובאופן אבסורדי עשו זאת, לפחות חלקית, באישור ישראל. החריגה המשמעותית הראשונה הראה החל מ-2013, ונמשכה בגלים עד 2021, בנימוק של מאבק בשלוחת דאעש בסיני. החריגה השנייה הראה בתחילת המלחמה הנוכחית, כשמצרים קרבה את כוחות הצבא שלה לגבול רצועת עזה, בנימוק של מניעת פריצת עזתים לסיני.
Egypt is in very serious violation of our peace agreement in the Sinai. And this is an issue which is going to come to the fore because it's not a tolerable situation. We have bases being built that can only be used for offensive operations.
ואם זה לא מספיק, מצרים גם חפרה בשנים האחרונות מעברים תת-קרקעיים מתחת לתעלת סואץ, שמאפשרים לצבאה לצלוח את התעלה בכוחות גדולים בזמן קצר יחסית. בנוסף, הצי המצרי הפך בשנות ה-2000 לאחד החזקים במזרח התיכון. חיל האוויר של מצרים חלש יותר מזה הישראלי, אך מבוסס על מטוסי F-16 מתקדמים יחסית. וחיל השריון המצרי, אחד הגדולים בעולם, מונה אלפי טנקים, ביניהם גם טנקי אברמס אמריקניים, שאת חלקם מייצרת מצרים בעצמה ברישיון מוושינגטון. ועם זאת, צריך גם להוריד את מפלס החרדה. למרות השיח הער בנושא, בימים האחרונים לא התבצעו שינויים משמעותיים בפריסת הכוחות המצריים בסיני. בנוסף, העובדה שרוב עצמתו של הצבא המצרי מושתתת על נשק אמריקני, דווקא יוצרת תלות מוגברת של קהיר בוושינגטון. אבל, גם אם הסבירות שמצרים תתקוף מחר בבוקר אינה גבוהה, לאחר ה-7 באוקטובר, אף אחד לא מעוניין לגלות ששוב נרדמנו בשמירה.
Israeli intelligence has identified that Egypt is severely violating its peace treaty. Back in 1979, Israel signed a peace treaty with the Egyptians. That was a famous scene there with President Jimmy Carter and Sadat and Begin, and they signed this peace deal that's still going today. And according to this peace deal, the Sinai Peninsula is meant to be a largely demilitarized zone. There was always allowed to be a little bit of military presence, but as it is today, the Egyptians, as we talked about in that previous video, have been building up their military installations there, building Air Force bases, expanding the roads so that they can accommodate tanks and heavy machinery. And as you saw in that report, they have built tunnels under the Suez Canal. And the purpose of these tunnels is to make it easier and quicker to move heavy machinery like tanks from mainland Egypt into the Sinai Peninsula. The Egyptian military buildup in the Sinai actually goes back quite a number of years. It began in earnest in 2013 when ISIS had some cells operating in the Sinai, and Egypt went in there to fight against ISIS, and the Israelis kind of retroactively allowed that, and they acquiesced, and they even participated with airstrikes against ISIS to root out ISIS in the Sinai Peninsula. The problem is that after ISIS was defeated in the Sinai, the Egyptian military buildup remained and only intensified. And according to current assessments of the Israeli security forces, Egypt has approximately 4 times the amount of military forces in the Sinai than are permitted by the 1979 peace treaty. Now, the United States provides $1.5 billion in military aid to Egypt every year. This constitutes a significant portion of the Egyptian economy. As you see, the Egyptians are using that military aid to threaten Israel. So this is a very dangerous situation. The Egyptian military, we're not talking about like Hamas militias that just have a ground force and a bunch of rockets, or Hezbollah that has significant missile capability and ground forces but no air force, or like Syria that had a big army but it didn't have the political backing or the political stability to do anything with it. Egypt is a country of 120 million people. It has a massive military. It has F-16 fighter jets. It has Abrams tanks. It has a large ground force, and they've moved into the Sinai Desert onto Egypt's borders. And as you saw in that video, Ambassador Yechiel Leiter, that's the new Israeli ambassador to the United States, has begun speaking about this issue, saying that Israel's not going to stand idly by while this military buildup happens and while these violations are happening. He's also pointing out that these military installations in the Sinai are built for offensive capabilities. We should also add that all of the current Egyptian exercises and practice maneuvers that have been happening are all built around an Israeli enemy, fighting an Israeli enemy. So Egypt is literally, in practice, preparing for war with Israel. And as you saw Ambassador Leiter say, that this is a clear violation of the peace deal. It's going to be put on the table in all of the negotiations. Now, while all this is going on, there is a diplomatic crisis happening between Egypt and the United States. President Trump famously a number of weeks ago announced his plan to evacuate the population of Gaza and to move large numbers of Gazan civilians into Egypt. At that point, President al-Sisi canceled a visit with President Trump. He refused to meet with President Trump. That's very dangerous considering how much aid Egypt gets from the United States. Canceling a visit with President Trump is a very strong statement. Let's add to that, just a couple of months ago on December 19th, the Egyptians hosted a summit meeting of 8 Islamic nations, including Pezeshkian, the president of Iran, and Erdogan, the dictator of Turkey. They were both in Egypt at a summit meeting with Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the Palestinian Authority, a summit meeting of Islamic nations, including the Iranians and the Turks, sworn enemies of Israel, hosted in Cairo. So while the Egyptians are receiving all this aid from the United States and are ostensibly a moderate Arab state, and they're always part of the negotiations between Israel and her enemies, they're really getting deeper and deeper into bed with Israel's enemies and snubbing President Trump in the process. And at the same time, as we said, their military really depends on the United States. So this is a very tense situation. The big question hanging over all of it is why? Why are the Egyptians doing it? What do they seek to gain? All assessments are that Egypt does not want to have a kinetic shooting war with Israel, but they're threatening Israel. They certainly look like they're preparing for war with Israel. And the question is, what direction is Egypt going to take? Is Egypt choosing to go more in bed with the Islamists, with the hostile actors, and maybe completely turning on Israel and breaking the peace treaty? That would be very dangerous considering the assistance they get from the United States. Or are they just saber rattling in order to flex their muscles? Let's bear in mind that the Egyptians are not necessarily happy with the Abraham Accords, improved American relations with Saudi Arabia. It doesn't really help them because if there's other Arab nations that have good working relationships with the United States, then Egypt is less of a strategic asset to the United States, and maybe Egypt loses power if these other Muslim nations have a better relationship with the U.S. Maybe Egypt is looking in different directions. It's unclear what Egypt's play is, and I'm not going to pretend to know, but it is unequivocal that this is happening. The Egyptians are building up a military presence. They are engaged in exercise maneuvers and practice maneuvers, assuming an Israeli enemy. Again, unlike Hamas, unlike Hezbollah, that are these terrorist militias that have some missiles and have some ground forces, neither of those had an air force of F-16s. Neither Hamas nor Hezbollah have 1,000 tanks, including the most advanced tanks in the world, the Abrams tanks from the United States. So this Egyptian army is extremely formidable. It's extremely dangerous. It's building up on Israel's southern border. And amidst all of this, we have this massive diplomatic breakdown happening between the United States and the Egyptians. I don't know where this is headed, but this is a very dangerous situation. Please remember to subscribe to this channel, to tell other people about it, and make sure to visit Israel365news.com for constant updates, news, and analysis from Israel.